Good evening, everybody. Welcome to a slightly earlier live than usual, but welcome to our first of a new monthly series we're starting, Karen's Book Corner. I got that title right, Karen, didn't I? It's Karen's Book Corner. So we're going to be doing everyone. Everybody knows Karen. So she'll be coming in doing some stuff for her books and then asking the questions. So I'll hardly be speaking, which is probably a blessing for everybody in disguise. So, hand over you, Karen, for the first of tonight's readings.
Thank
you.
Hello. Thanks. Thank you very much, Scott. And hello and welcome to everyone who's joining us either live or afterwards on Catch Up. It really does mean a lot, and it's wonderful to be able to speak to you and to do events like this in this strange new world. And thank goodness for all this new technology. I'll kick off with a reading first of all. Break the ice, so to speak, and then we'll just be chatting about it. And please do have any questions, any comments, please do pop them in the box there, and we'll do our best to answer everything as we go along. So I thought I'd start with Parliament of Rooks, which is one of my Yorkshire ghost stories, and this is set in Haworth. It is a dual timeline book, so it's set in the present, where Verity has recently divorced and she's just bought a property in Haworth, which she is doing up as a guest house called the Rookery. But as she soon finds out, the past is still part of the present. It is the guest house is haunted by not one, two, three, that there's a couple of spirits in there with her, and the past timeline and the past that is playing out within the present is set in the mid-19th century, so the time of the Brontes. So it does feature the Bronte family, and especially Emily, who had more of a starring role than I expected when I planned out the book, but who am I to argue with Emily Bronte, even in my own book. And it's, if you think, it's Haworth really got the worst of the Industrial Revolution. So the mills, the loud, hardworking, thundering, noisy machinery with children as young as 5 crawling about underneath. The injury, death rate was horrific. And then going home to overcrowding. And Haworth in particular had a problem with its water supply. One of the main wells actually was filtered through the graveyard, which you can imagine did not do the death rate any good at all. And disease just ripped through the village, all sorts, TB, cholera, typhoid, scarlet fever, many more. It was not a nice time to try and live. So in the book, the two timelines collide. And I thought the best way to kick off the first Karen's Book Corner with paranormal in history is with a ghost tour through Haworth. So here goes. So, Aunt Jane, Hannah cried, waving madly before dashing to hug Jane. I smiled as Jane's face lit up in an expression of pleasure. I'd seen nobody but Hannah evincing her since her own son and daughter had left home. Hannah had been the one who had convinced her to join us this evening. Escaping Hannah's clutches, Jane greeted Lara and me, waiting patiently on the church steps. Auntie Verity's got a boyfriend, Hannah announced before we'd barely had a chance to say hello. He's going to paint my picture, and Mum wore walking boots without heels all day. Are you serious? I've been gone less than a week. We've got a lot to tell you, Lara said, then approached the gentleman dressed in top hat and tails to collect a couple of lanterns he was handing out. Jane squeezed my arm and looked at me. Verity? Not now, I said, nodding at the top-hatted man. The tour's about to start. We don't have time. I'll fill you in later. I could deal with your advice. Okay, Jane drawled. Are you all right? I'm not sure, to be honest. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, Top Hat said, forestalling all conversation for the moment. The ghosts of Haworth welcome you and invite you into their world. I've had enough of that already, I hissed to Lara. The man glared at me, then bade the small group across Main Street to Gagers Croft. I leaned against the stone wall of the narrow covered passageway and relaxed as I listened to the man weave his story of inns and slums, horses and carriageways, ladies in full skirts dropping small curtsies in response to the lifted top hats of gentlemen's greetings. I peered out at Main Street. It seemed to have grown darker, much darker. And I blinked when I realised the modern-day street lamps, fashioned to resemble oldie-worldy gaslights, had disappeared. In their stead were the broad, dancing, naked flames of pitch torches. I gasped and clamped my hand over my mouth as I emerged onto Main Street to investigate further. The place stank. The underlying smell of burning pitch and coal fires added a singed accent to the overpowering stench of raw sewage and rot. I lifted my foot to investigate what I'd stood in and realised the entire street was filth. The cobbles were gone and muck flowed down the steep hill. I jumped backwards to avoid the two gentlemen about to walk into me and shouted after them, but they did not acknowledge my presence. Turning to Lara, my mouth dropped open. She was gone, as were Jane, Hannah, and the rest of the ghost tour group. They hadn't passed me, so they must have moved deeper into Gagers Croft. I hurried after them and was again halted by the overpowering stench of sewage. Houses were crammed together so tightly the air could barely circulate around them, and I did not want to think about the constituents of the stinking piles the dim torchlight revealed. Midden heaps, I thought. Those are midden heaps. Fear solidified into a twisted ball in my stomach, and I stepped back into the passageway, then whirled around at the crack of a whip and a shout behind me. A horse loomed above me, whinnying crazedly, and I screamed as the cart it pulled bore down on me. White faces stared at me, and Jane and Lara both put hands on my arms. Verity, you okay? What happened? I gaped at the strange faces watching me with a mixture of curiosity and contempt and apologised. It's nothing. I just got a bit carried away. The tour guide moved the group on, past the Black Bull, the King's Arms and the White Lion. But I barely listened, still spooked by the experience I'd had in Gagers Croft. It seemed so real. The smell or the memory of it still stung my nose, and I'd honestly believed I was about to be trampled. Hannah's squeal brought me back to the tour, and I saw we were outside the rookery. My guest house was one of the stops on the ghost tour. Flanked by Lara and Jane, I listened in fascination as Top Hat described numerous sightings of the Grey Lady, painting a picture of exactly what I had seen, although there was no mention of orbs of light or people being pushed. Auntie Verity's seen her twice, Hannah informed the tour guide. That's her house, and she keeps seeing the ghost. Mum's seen her too, but I haven't, not yet. I've only fallen on the floor in that other place, the White Lion. That's the only ghost I've seen, she continued, oblivious of Top Hat's irritation at this interruption of his narrative. His eyes narrowed as he shifted his gaze to me, and I nodded, then shrugged in apology. His expression grew thoughtful, and he moved us on, introducing the Witch's House at the end of West Lane. I don't like it here, Mummy, Hannah said. I feel funny. I want to go. Shush, we'll be moving on in a minute, Lara said. I want to hear the story about the witch. But I don't like it, Hannah cried. I really don't like it. I'll take her back to the White Lion, Jane said, taking Hannah's hand. We'll have hot chocolate by the fire and wait for you there. Okay, Aunt Jane, let's go. Hannah almost dragged Jane away, casting an accusing glance back at her mother, and Lara met my eyes. I couldn't decipher the expression in them and wondered if she was feeling the same sensation I was. My chest tightening so much I was having to make a conscious effort to deflate and inflate my lungs for air. Top Hat raised his voice as he came to the climax of his story. Either that or he was just sick of the interruptions caused by me and my friends. I heard the words hanging from the rafters and reached my limit. I glanced at Lara, who nodded, and we placed our lanterns on the low wall bordering the path, walked away from the tour, and hurried after Jane and Hannah. Whatever that is in there, Pendle witch or not, it does not come from the light, Lara said. That's a dark energy. Thank God Jane took Hannah away so quickly. I should never have brought her on this tour. I said nothing. I'd had enough of ghosts. I wanted hot chocolate by the fire with my friends. You're on mute, Shelley.
Oh, I forgot. Thanks. That was really good, Karen. Really, actually brought back so many memories just reading your book. I think I read that book so quick I actually could just go back and read it all over again, and I think that's what I'm going to do.
Brilliant.
It just makes me want to read them.
I'm unmuted now. I was pressing the wrong microphone. I was pressing the microphone on the screen rather than the one down below. That's really good, Karen. The thing I love about your story is the way you put so much passion and feeling into them. Like the other night when we had you on and you were reading that as well. There's just so much, I've listened to people reading before and it's very flat. If that makes sense, it's the same tone all the way through. But your tone, it changes all the time, and I think that makes the story's interesting as well. But the way you bring it over is really, really good. The thing you were saying about water, there's kind of sewage water filtering down into the river. Is that no similar to what happened at Ian?
Quite possible. Well, it will have been, yes, because the hygiene in Haworth was particularly horrendous. Ian, that village is amazing, and I think that the experience of the past couple of years has shown us just how courageous and just what wonderful human beings villagers of that place were. Yes, the hygiene, they didn't understand bacteria back then. So they didn't understand illness. They didn't understand that being so overcrowded would just pass the illness on so quickly and so easily. They didn't understand how to look after their own water. That the example of one of the main wells, the water literally filtered from the moors, that wonderful, fresh, clean water filtering through peat and heather, perfect. And then through the graveyard into the well. And another of the main wells, the cows refused to drink at it, but the humans were still taking the water.
I know.
And I think, thank goodness, they at least boiled it to brew ale, which was the main drink, and the different levels of strength of it, and thank goodness. But then, of course, around that time, the temperance movement came in with Methodists, so people were then starting to move away from alcohol. But then the water killed them. Just terrific. What's the word? The life expectancy at that time in Haworth was 20.8 years old.
Yeah, I know by reading your book, The Parliament of Rooks, it was the theme all through the full book, the amount of deaths that there actually was, full families getting wiped out, like one after the other, through illness.
Yes.
And I did find that quite horrific.
Yeah. In fact, it really hit me while I was researching it, and while I was writing it. In Patrick Bronte, when he actually lived till his 80s, he was completely against the trend. Yeah. But he was doing 2 or 3 funerals a day. And the strength that takes to be able to do that day after day, year after year, is amazing. And he was actually the one who recognized that there was a problem with the water, and he got somebody in from the health board to actually have a look at it and to study it, and they realized what was happening, what the problem was, and to fix it. So he actually saved thousands of lives.
So then the life expectancy would have went up.
Yes,
slightly.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, Mister, you're right. Yeah. And did I say a comment Sandy before? Sorry to scare you again, Sandy.
Yeah. What was the comment before, Scott? Where can I buy Karen's book? I'll let you.
Oh, thank you, Harry. You can buy them from my website, which is www.karenperkinsauthor.com, and they're in print for Kindle and audiobook. And some of them, they're all starting to go now for Nook and Kobo, etc. as well. Or they're all on Amazon or online retailers, or even your independent bookshop. They can order them in for you. Thank you, and I hope you enjoy them.
We'll put the links back up on the Facebook page, so if you have a look, you can go and visit Karen's website, and you'll be able to get all your information there as well. And it's important to point out
Oh, sorry, Shelley.
No, you're all right, Karen. Sorry. I was saying it's good to know that all your books are bestsellers across the globe.
Yes, they've all done really well, which is just amazing to see. And I think Parliament of Rooks has been the highest ranked one, which it actually made number 21 in the UK Kindle chart, which is amazing. I thought it would take a few more years to claw my way there. And just thank you to everybody who's bought them and supported me.
It just goes into the author. Your style of writing is just that once you start reading the book, that's you're lost. You can't put it down. So you do need to read them a few times, because once just isn't enough, actually.
We will also be very, very happy to announce to talk to Karen during the week, and we are setting up a new shop. We found a different supplier. We're setting up a new shop, and we will be stocking all of Karen's books as well. So details of the new shop will be up on our webpage and Facebook very, very soon, and we will have all Karen's books as well. So buy them from us. Buy them from us.
They will be signed as well.
They'll be signed by the lady herself if you buy them from us. I had to do that plug. Sorry, Karen. Carry on.
No, well, that's what I was talking over Shelley to say.
Oh, so sorry, Karen.
No, it's me.
Is there any more comments, Scott?
Mr. Cat saying this is fascinating. Thanks, Mr. Cat.
Yep. And hello to everybody that's on the chat.
I'll tell you, Haworth is just it's a fascinating place. If you haven't been there, then it is well worth a visit. It really is like stepping back into time. They do a lot of events there as well throughout the year, celebrating all sorts of different periods of history.
Right.
I think I was fascinated by the Brontes. They really caught me at school, and their books, especially Jane Eyre and Wuthering Heights and Tenant of Wildfell Hall, they've never really left. And their books, they're the only books that I read at school that I keep rereading and have always kept rereading. And so I went to Haworth, and until I'd actually been there, I never realised just how surrounded by death the Brontes were. And it really brought another element to the books, and I understood the books a lot more when I saw the parsonage, looked out onto the church and the graveyard, and they were surrounded by graves, and their walk into the village was through the graveyard. So there's that iconic scene in Wuthering Heights where Heathcliff actually digs up Cathy's body. But walking through Haworth, they would have seen that often the graves being dug up for more family members to be added. We've talked about how high the death rate was. So it was a hell of a life. It really was.
It definitely synchronized.
Yeah, well, a hell of a lot of lives, all of them.
It wasn't a good time at all. You see, when the death rate back then was horrendous, you know, absolutely horrendous. Just a couple of comments. Mr. Cat say support small businesses. You're right, Mr. Cat. You know, especially during what's going on just now. We don't talk about it on this channel, but it's, the current circumstances. We need to help each other at whatever way we can. Sherry, Lippincott, I think I pronounced that right. She's excellent. We've got Sandy again. I really want to go on a ghost walk with you, Cam, if I can pluck up the courage.
Hold you to that, Sandy.
Maureen, hi Maureen. No, for everybody joining, thanks for coming in. I love how do you pronounce that?
Haworth.
You are it.
I don't know how you pronounce Glaswegian though, I'm afraid, Scott.
Well, I don't know how.
I think we would say Haworth.
I would say Haworth.
Haworth.
I would definitely say Haworth. I read Jeanette in the day, I couldn't put it down. It was exciting to see my name on the cover of a book. I love Karen's books. I love Haworth a couple of years ago. Amazing place.
Hi, Jenny.
Harry, thanks for the excuse me, the info. Why did I write that? I think Sandy, you're talking your previous comments. A question for you. Are the pirate books also ghost stories?
They're not, no. They're purely historical. So very much. I used to do an awful lot of sailing when I was younger. And I actually injured myself, which meant I just couldn't get on the water anymore. So I could go sailing in my head and on tall ships, no less. So they're very much purely historical about that time, about 1686. So at the time of Henry Morgan, before Blackbeard and all the privateers really got going, and they're really exploring just what it would take for people to cross an ocean in wooden ships at that day and age to a land that's unknown. And then also they did that in the search of freedom, but essentially enslaved 2-3 continents in the process. So there's a lot of dichotomy there. And did you know that pirate ships were the most democratic places on the earth at that time? They elected their leaders. They even had a health insurance scheme.
Really?
For pirates?
Yeah. Yeah. Of course, they also killed each other, but, it was the 17th century. But you never know. There may be a ghost story aboard ship at some point. And actually, we're talking about the Mary Celeste on Tuesday, aren't we?
Coming up.
Yes.
Harry, is it possible to get a few autographed? We'd like to gift a few to family.
Thank you, Harry. That's lovely. Yes, you can either through my website if you need them straight away, which is KarenPerkinsAuthor.com, or through the Paranormal in History shop when that gets up and running. And if you message, if you message them, if you want particular names in the books, then just send a message and I'll make them out to the specific people that you want and make them personalized for you.
That's really lovely.
Who inspires you in the literary world?
Oh my goodness, Janet, how long have we got? Well, obviously the Bronte sisters inspire me. I would have said that that Emily Bronte was my main inspiration, but then I was recently did a read along of Jane Eyre with Rowan Coleman on her Instagram, and just rereading Jane Eyre and going into the depth of one of the excerpts, and then that's become my favourite again. until I read Wuthering Heights again. So most definitely the Brontes. Stephen King, my goodness. When I first read Carrie, when I was 13, 14, he really opened my eyes into the world of literature. And just what's possible, the stories that are possible. And would you believe he was told that his blend of fantasy and horror would never take off? It just shows that the stories are written with passion and belief, then they're well worth reading. I enjoy a lot of historical as well. So Anne O'Brien, Alison Weir, Tracy Borman, Philippa Gregory, and also a lot of the independent authors that worked so hard. David Leadbeater, John Paul Davis, Louise Ross, LJ Ross, and just so many more. And I'm sorry I can't mention you all. But it's the people who write because they have to write. They just have to write. And then they have to make pay because they have to live. But they write because they have to write. And that shines through in the stories, in the books.
Yeah.
Jane Eyre is one of Missy's favourite books.
Yeah, good taste, Misty. Good taste.
Needful Things is an incredible read.
It is, yes. And every time I read that, I get something else from it.
So how many times would you read a book, Karen? I know I've had books in the past that I've read 2 or 3 times. And I feel it all makes it. It's we're watching a film sometimes. The second or third time you maybe watch it or read it, you pick up on a lot of little things that you totally missed the first time round.
Yes.
And do you find that?
Yeah. Yes. And I think as we're in different times in our life, when we read the book, we have a different perspective. So we pick up different things from the book as well. I've lost count of the number of times I've read Jane Eyre, Wuthering Heights, and Tenant of Wildfell Hall. In fact, I haven't read Tenant of Wildfell Hall enough. Anne Bronte is very much overlooked, and she's right up there with the sisters. So I need to read that again. But my favourites I will read over and over again. Daphne du Maurier is another one. I'll read hers over and over again. And my favourite books, I have them in the paperback that I first bought when I couldn't afford anything else, the hardback when I could finally get one to adorn my shelves, then the Kindle, just because it's easy to read and you can take it with you, and the audiobook, because I do enjoy, I spend so much time with my eyes on a screen, I do enjoy being read to, so audiobooks. So I'll have 4 or 5 copies in the house of my favourite ones of different formats, and I will keep reading them.
Do you find sometimes when you read your own books back, Karen, that you kind of get like, perhaps if you're reading and you read a part of the story and you think, I didn't think like that when I was reading it, but you get a different perspective almost when you're reading. I know you wrote the book, but feel sometimes that you get a different perspective, like the same as if you was to read somebody else's book over.
Yes, I don't always realise the undercurrents, subcurrents.
Yeah, the depth of how actually the meaning.
Yeah, because I think it's so, for me, the writing is so emotional. It kind of pours out of me as the emotion. And it's only when I read them back, maybe after about a year, that when I can read them a bit more objectively, I think, oh my goodness, I know what that's about. Oh, I know what that relates to. A lot of things do come out in metaphor, and I can't say any more because just in case they get related to real life and real, and I'm working out my issues with.
That's right. I know what you're saying. Would any of your that's a good comment. Would any of your books be made into films?
I really, really hope so. I really hope so. I'd love them to be. I really would. Although I'd find it very hard somebody else taking the story and interpreting it, or interpreting them even. I've had a couple of exciting emails, but nothing's gone anywhere yet. I think just feelers. But we'll see. If you know any film producers, please send them the link to this. and send them a copy of the book even. And who knows? It would be lovely. It would be wonderful if they were. It really would.
They're that good stories, and they've got a lot of depth to them, Karen, and they've got a lot of twists and turns. So I think they would make great films, great movies. For any film directors out there, producers.
Yes.
We're doing really well with
Well,
tonight. You're a hit, Karen. Your books are a hit.
I couldn't hear that.
There's a lot of comments tonight, so your book corner's a hit so far. You're loving reading your books.
Brilliant. Should we do another reading?
Yeah.
Please,
Yeah,
I'll mute my mic and sit back and enjoy.
Good luck.
Well, we've if you've been following the Paranormal in History channel, you see we've been doing an awful lot of lives about the Pendle Witches, about who were the real people behind the stories and the legends, and also Forgotten Pendle, just what gets left out of the story that gets told. And there are a couple more coming up this week. I think on Wednesday we're talking about Roger Knoll, who's the witch hunter, and that's Wednesday morning. And then on Thursday evening, it's the second of the Forgotten Pendles. So I thought to tie in with that would be a good opportunity to read from Murder by Witchcraft. Now this is it's a short story, and it is about Janet Preston, who is one of the people who's not often mentioned with the Pendle Witches, but she was very much a part of the story and a part of the trials. But because back in 1612 the borders were different, she lived in Gisborne, which at that time was in Yorkshire, although it's in Lancashire now. So instead of being arrested and imprisoned and tried with the other women and men as well, and children too, she was arrested and tried at York Castle. Now she stands out as well because she was actually tried twice for murder by witchcraft. First time she was, of course, found innocent. She was released. A few days later, she went to Malkin Tower to what was presented in court as a witch's sabbat. Now, whether she went to share her experiences, because Demdike and Chattox and Alison and Anne Redfern had already been arrested and were in Lancaster jail awaiting trial. She may have wanted to give support to the family, share her experiences, tell them what to expect. Or was it a witch's sabbat? Did they plan on killing the jailer and blow up the castle? Did they plan on killing the man who persecuted Janet? Did they plan on rescuing the women who were incarcerated? We'll never know. Now, although she was arrested for being at Malkin Tower at that witch's sabbat, supposedly, she was actually tried for killing the Lord of the Manor, Thomas Lister, about 4 years previously. And that charge was brought against his son, who was also called Thomas Lister. Of course, in Yorkshire, if you've got a good name, you don't waste it. You use it over and over again, but it does get a bit confusing, unfortunately. And so she was brought to trial for murder of Thomas Lister. And I'll start at chapter 1, where she arrives back at York Castle less than a month after she'd left it. So late April 1612. I stumbled forward into a familiar gloomy stench at his push. The heavy iron-bound oak door slammed behind me, and I heard the mechanism of the lock as York Castle's jailer secured his dungeon. I stood where I were, frozen in disbelief. How could I be back here mere weeks after Sir Edward Bromley and his jury freed me? I shivered and pulled my cloak about me as I peered into the gloom, trying to pick out the deeper shadows of figures. It were nithering in here, as it had been before. But how many others would I be sharing this place with this time? And who were they? What had they done to be kept in here months ahead of the next assizes? It had to be something serious, otherwise they'd have had bail. The jailer were fond of coin. Are you just going to stand there? I recognised the voice. John Wilson? That cannot be you still here. Aye, lass, here I still be. His words were broken off by deep coughing. I took a tentative step forward, then shuddered at a splash and an icy chill seeping into my stockings. The stink of stagnant water and shite slapped me, and I gasped, slapping my hand over my mouth and nose. Wilson chuckled. A strange sound in these environs. Aye, still flooded. Reckon you've missed worst of it, though. The gloom seemed to lift as my eyes grew used to it, and I moved by instinct. John's voice came from the same corner he'd occupied in April, and I took small steps forward, skirts raised out of the mire, resigned to the smell and the scurrying of fleeing rodents. Then I remembered my last incarceration here and let my skirts fall. There were no point in trying to keep them dry. The pool of water was not as large as I remembered, and I rose out of it as I moved further away from the wall bounded by the river foss. I sat, doing my best not to think about what I was sitting in. From memory, no part of this stone floor would be anything approaching clean. I'd understood you to be freed, John, as I were. Aye, not guilty of coining. The main evidence in my favour being that I have no coin. Not usually a good thing, I remarked as I shuffled closer to share some warmth. Old habits never left us, it seemed. And not so now. John gave that strange, high-pitched chuckle once more. I've no coin to pay my fees, nor family to settle my debt for me. So they keep you here? Aye, not guilty I may be, but I'll not see freedom until I find some coin. How much do you owe? William had settled my own debt to the jailer and had not told me the amount. Just how much my husband paid my tormentors. 9 shillings, Wilson said. But that's a full month's wages. Aye, and I'll die in here for it. He chuckled some more. Turned him mad it has, forever laughing, a woman said. Better than the screaming and raging had put us all through at first, another said. True enough. Once the jailer started adding shilling fines to his debt every time he cursed him or the judge, castle court, he's found a comfort in mirth. There's some sense in that, I allowed, trying to imagine the joyful relief on release, being slaughtered by the horror of continued incarceration in this place with no end in sight. Happen I'd choose madness too, in them circumstances. I'm Maggie Thorne, the first woman said. Lizzie Nixon, said the second. Janet Preston, I completed the trilogy of introductions. Ah, the witch, Maggie said. We've been hearing about you. Aye, and their mothers and all. I bristled. I ain't no witch. I were tried for it once before and the good juryman declared me innocent. Then why are you here again if you ain't no witch? If I were a witch, do you not think I'd have flown away somewhere far away from this place? She makes a good point there, Lizzie said. But them other witches, them she kens o'er Pendle way, word is they were planning to blow up Lancaster Castle just like gunpowder treason. Aye, that's right, a man's voice joined the discussion. I heard about that. I reckon they were planning to blow up York Castle. And all. Is that why you're here and not off with the devil? I could barely see him, but recognised the movements of his right arm. He'd crossed his son, a priest then, another Catholic in this hellhole. Couldn't decide if that were a good thing or nay. Then the full import of his words hit me, and I took a breath. terrified by what they were saying, then coughed and retched on the foul stench of fetid water and human waste. Nonsense, I croaked when I could speak once more. Thomas Lister, he's why I'm here. There's no plots nor witches, just a man lost in grief and hatred. But Lister's a fine gentleman. Why would he bother himself with the likes of you? The priest asked. I knew his father. He thinks I knew him too well. Ah, the women said in understanding. And did you? My breath hitched as I remembered just in time to avoid drawing in a great chestful of air. He were my master, nowt more. You're the one that murdered him, Lizzie exclaimed. They say he bled when he touched his corpse. Nowt but malicious gossip, and waved the absurd accusation away. Aye, damnable gossip. Put us all in here, it has, eh, Lizzie? Maggie elbowed a friend. I had nowt to do with his father's death, nor that of his mam neither, I protested. Aye, we know. Just like we had nowt to do with counterfeit coins at Thursday market, and Father Greaves here ain't no priest. That's right, Lizzie. He ain't no priest, and them bad guineas were nowt to do with us neither, Maggie giggled. All of us are as innocent as Mad John here. But I stopped short. Fear, anger and despair taking the words from my tongue. I've done nowt, I whispered, to another chuckle and cough from John Wilson. No bugger else heard me. You're on mute.
I'll take my mute off as well. And you just get that gross, isn't that? Fascinated. But I mean, that is in itself, that chapter in itself, just highlights what it was like, slightly like what the conditions were like in the cells at that time.
Yeah. Oh,
and they all just talk,
perfect.
and they just talk as though it's just another day, like not just another day, but they know how bad the conditions are, but they just deal with it. You know, that isn't the one thing to come out of the cells, to be fair. It's the torture and the starvation and getting kept awake. That was it. That was the conditions, lying and all that weight camp, rat infested. It wasn't as bad for them as it was the torture and stuff.
Yeah.
Can get kept awake.
It's horrific what to people. And of course they haven't been tried yet. They've not been found guilty. This is right. And this is April. They won't be tried until July.
That's right.
They've got a long time down there, and it'll just get more and more crowded as well.
Yeah, I like that one line. Well, I like Walkham, but I like that one line when she says, "I stood there frozen." You can just, when you describe the dungeon, you can just imagine, you've been put in there, the jailer slamming the door behind it, and her just standing there in total disbelief and shock, knowing that, just a few days previously, she was set free, as you say, but just standing looking around her, and, we don't know how many X amount of people in there already for all different, you wouldn't have known if they were murderers or robbers, whatever. It could be anybody. So her just standing there thinking, I'm here again. You just get that image of how she must have felt. And then, as you say, Chelsea, the conditions in the dungeons, it was just nothing. It was just stone on the floor. And
powerless. Completely powerless.
Yeah.
And not knowing how long, that guy, that man that she met, he'd been in there, as you say, it could be months to the next assizes. So you could be in there,
He'd already been found innocent, but you don't just get set free back then. You had to pay for your keep, what keep it was. So you had to pay for your board and lodging effectively, even though it was those conditions, very little food, and water. Well, it would have been very weak ale again. And if you couldn't pay, then you were kept there until you could pay. And if you didn't have family and friends to do it, then you were stuck. There were very few to you.
So what was happening there?
Sorry, Shelley, you know.
No, sorry, Scott. On you go if you.
No, if you, as you say, Karen, if you didn't have family or friends and you had no other means of income, no estates or land, you know, or whatever, then in theory you could have been in there for the rest of your days if you had no way of paying it.
No.
So
no, you have to find a way. Yeah.
So
be there till you died, unless you could find a way to earn your release. And you'll have to find out how John manages by reading the book.
Yeah, and of course, Janet. No, Janet. Sorry, I'm getting mixed up. It's Janet, isn't it?
It is Janet. Yeah.
I obviously put it because there's a lot of Janets. And I'm thinking, definitely to see what happens with Janet and obviously the other ones that are in there. You know, I mean, I've read that book. The both of the books. Because obviously I've read most of your books now, Karen, and I'm thinking to myself, it's just exciting to know you're reading just there, and to personally know what then goes on to happen.
Yeah,
it certainly needs to be read.
Thank you.
Very exciting.
Don't tell the ending. Don't tell the ending, Shelley.
I'm saying very exciting, but I think I kind of exaggerated that just a wee bit. Definitely worth a read.
Thank you. It's interesting what you said about the number of Janets as well, because there were, I mean, this Janet Preston, she was an accused in Divided by Witchcraft that covers the Salisbury witches who we talked about in one of our lives last week. And there was Janet Bailey there who was also an accused, but who was acquitted. And then in Maine witch trials, there was Janet Davis, who was an accuser, although she was only very young. She was, well, they put her at 9, but I think she was more like 11 or 12, but still a child.
Yeah.
And there's another Janet or two involved within the story as well. And funnily enough, because there were so many Janets within the Pendle Witch stories on each side of the story, that's where my name for the character that comes into The Haunting of Thor's Cross, another Janet, came from. Because the Pendle Witches was just so, when I first read about them as a teenager, they absolutely grabbed my imagination, and I didn't realize that I was actually going to be writing about them in such detail. But then they still did, Janet Hargreaves, yes. And they still kind of formulated the Janet in Thor's Cross as well. It was that community turning on one another. But it's a bit confusing now that there's so many Janets. Sorry, everybody. It wasn't planned that way.
But it was a popular name as well, so you can't really help it. I mean, you're just kind of keep with the times.
Yes.
And the names that are coming out.
And it also brings out more characters. I mean, you talk about the Good Friday meeting, etc., which is obviously a big part of the Pendle Witch trials, the whole Pendle story itself. But that's in a way that's why I'm glad that we're doing Forgotten Pendle as well, because there's so many Janets and so many names involved in this. I know the general Pendle is the this initial 12, arrested, tried, executed, whatever. But it's the background to it that I don't think people actually realise how many strings there was to the Pendle story, how many people were involved, maybe not directly, but indirectly there was, they were all involved in some way. And with your books as well, that brings it to light as well.
It really does.
Yes.
This book sounds right up my.
Enjoy.
Definitely go to Amazon, buddy. There's just that many names. Obviously, what I was doing Forgotten Pendle, I've been reading bits and pieces, between our weekly spots, and I still can't get my head around it. I've got the basic facts, but
there is a lot.
It's just so amazing.
Well, I've got piles and piles and piles of research notes, as well as all the books. My dining table hasn't seen the light of day for a long time because it's covered in paperwork, just piecing it all together. I've just seen Janet Curran say Janet Hargreaves was her maiden name. I think Janet Hargreaves was actually the name of the constable's wife as well. So I think there was a Janet Hargreaves within the story too. How spooky is that?
I know. Morning, she's been watching it live.
You got a test case for the Pendle Witches' forthcoming trials at Lancaster. That's a good question.
That is a good question, Mo. Yes, I think there's two things. I think one, he was helping his friend out because all the magistrates, they were interlinked. All the families had intermarried. They were all kin in one way or another. So he was a friend of Thomas Lister, so it would have helped him out. And the fact that she was tried before the Lancaster trials, that really did help him, because the fact that she attended the witches' sabbat at Malkin Tower with an evil company of witches, that was actually used as evidence, as fact in Janet Preston's trial, even though that case had not yet been tried. So yes, very much so. It certainly helped him along his way. Yes.
Yeah.
And he will have maximised the benefit of it. Yeah.
I apologise to the echo folks. I've been trying to fix it, but I just cannot work out where it's coming from. So I do apologise. I know it's totally irrelevant, but I just put that up for you, though.
Thank you very much. I've never really done that before, and I certainly never recorded myself doing anything like that before, so that was all new to me, Sam. But to do it in our home turf was it was really good, and I can't wait to do it again soon. Thank you, John.
Yeah, they're getting put back out to pasture soon. No, put out to pasture. No, you know what I mean? They're getting put back out in the field soon. Sorry, Shelley.
I don't know, but I prefer that. It's terrible. Take that comment away, Scott. You're not John's comment. Your comment. I wish we could put Scott's comment up there. We're getting put back into the field soon.
You know what I mean? Anytime you're up, John, just drop us a wee message, buddy. We do have to planned up here as well. So, we're always here. We're not going anywhere. We ain't going anywhere. But I don't mean in the field. Do you know what I mean? Back out investigating. Is that better for you?
Yes. Well, now that I've had a camera recording myself, I feel a wee bit more comfortable.
You're on camera 3 times a week, Shelley.
Sorry, Karen?
You're on camera 3 times a week.
Karen, I still can't get used to doing these lives, to be fair. I just know in my comfort zone facing the screen, but I just put myself right through it just so that I do get used to it, because I'm not very good with my speaking. Like, trying to articulate what's going through my brain into what is very difficult for me. So it's not even that my face is plastered all over the screen, it's that I can't really get my words out properly. So, and people will have already seen that. And I come from Glasgow, so my speech isn't that great either.
You do very well, Shelley. You're putting yourself down.
They did very, very well. And Jo as well, for our English team, she was out the other night.
Yeah.
In your area, Karen, I believe.
Yeah, just up the road in Paisley Bridge. Brilliant.
Yeah.
Paisley Bridge.
Yeah. Country.
The two teams get quite good results here. Well, we think they did. So, two good investigations. It's on a YouTube channel. And then, of course, Sarah and I had the pleasure of being let into the Covenanters prison yesterday afternoon in Edinburgh, which nobody's allowed into. But Jamie Christopher took us in, gave us a tour, and they kicked me into the Black Museum. which is nice, pleasant. So
That's it, I'll be
that's all the channel. So, but as
Jamie
you
was just hoping
with Fla,
I'm saying Jamie was just hoping that you were like a test subject, just fling you in there and see if you can get attacked.
well, I don't have any scratches so far.
No.
I don't have any scratches so far. Anyway, Karen, please do continue, though.
Right. Well, we mentioned Janet and the Haunting of Thor's Cross. So I thought the final reading do from that book. And this is set at Thrushcross Reservoir, which is just up the hill from Pateley Bridge, where Jo was investigating the other night. So she's right in the country there, and it's up in the moors. It's another dual timeline novel, so the present and the past, and it tells the story of Janet in the 18th century, so around 1770s. And whilst the present, that valley is flooded as a reservoir, in Janet's time, it was a village, and it tells her story within that village. And this is the first ghost story that I wrote, and it is very dear to me because it's set in a place where I essentially grew up. I mentioned sailing before. I learned to sail on that reservoir. And before I learned to sail, I basically ran feral as a child around its shores. And one day, my sister dared me to go up to the haunted house. That is what we called it. To go up there on my own, which of course I did, because when your younger sister dares you to do something when you're, 10, 11, 12, you do it, don't you? So I did it. I was climbing over the dry stone wall, and I looked down and I spotted this built into the wall. I don't know if you can see that well. And it's an old inkwell. And I thought, oh, what's that? Right, okay. So that kind of went in my pocket. Don't tell anyone. Don't tell the farmer. So it went in my pocket, and I carried on towards the house. And then I saw a figure at the upstairs window. Now, I've been in that house a lot, and the floor is covered in sheep shite. And it's not very nice. And it's deep. It was deep. It's a lovely home now, but it was deep. And there was no staircase. So that was it. I ran, and I bolted down that hill. I ran past my sister. I ignored all the taunts and the laughter, and I legged it. But I took the inkwell with me because there was just something. And I tell you, I mean, it's still with me now, 40 years later.
Yeah.
And I did kind of know that one day I would write a story about that. And recently I was tidying. I'm not telling you, Frankie. I said it once. And so I was tidying in the home, decluttering, as you do. And I found a whole load of my old school books from primary school that my mother had kept. So as you do, you just kind of leaf through them, forget the tidying. And, I found a story about the inkpot that is actually in that has become a chapter in the book. You were saying about reading things that you didn't realise. Yeah. I had absolutely no idea. So it made a big impression on me. So I'm going to pick up the story with Janet. She's orphaned at 15. And she's on her own in a very isolated Yorkshire village. And she's looked after, she's taken under the wing of the villagers, except there's one person, the local wool merchant, Richard Ramsgill, who kind of takes her under his wing a little bit too much. And the inevitable happens. She falls pregnant and he walks away because, of course, he's married. And vengeance on him is what drives the ghost story part of the book. That's what brings her into the present, to bring back vengeance on his family. So I'll pick up the story while she's still pregnant. It's the 24th of December, 1776.
Just before you start there, Karen, sorry, I'll be back. Be right back. I'll still be listening, okay? But I'll be right back. Okay.
Right. I leaned on the garden wall and peered down at the village. A constellation of candle and lantern flames moved from house to house as the wassailers endowed songs and blessings on the neighbours. Every house but mine. They would not come here. They would not bless my home. The only one in the Dale to be left out, and all because of an innocent child who had not yet been born. I caressed my belly. I shed no tears. The time for tears were past. I had no more upset, no more frustration, no more shame or pity in my soul. All I had now was hate. Hate for Richard Ramsgill, hate for his wife, and hate for every single villager who'd pledged their condolences when Mam and Pa died, who had told me I could come to them if I needed anything. But when I needed a little compassion, a little human kindness, they all turned their backs and called me names. Well, I did not need them. I did not need anyone. I had my wits, my home, my beasts, and I would soon have my child. Only 4 months to go now. My first and last Christmas alone. Soon I would have everything I needed, and the whole village could go to hell for all I cared. The wassailers walked up the lane. I watched their candle flames grow larger as they reached the gate inn. They were there a while, no doubt enjoying mince pies and spiced ale. Then the smithy. They did not spend so long there, despite the warmth of the forge. Closer now. I cursed my heart as it leaped in hope of them continuing straight up the hill to my own door. But no, they turned off to Eastgate House, home of Richard and Elizabeth Ramsgill. Well, bugger the lot of them. I did not need any of them, least of all Richard bloody Ramsgill. I would soon have everyone I needed, once my babby were born. I already had everything I needed. The moors always provided for one such as me, and the beasts had proved to be good at looking after themselves. I had meat, crops, and the knowledge of a cunning woman. They still came to me. Oh, aye, they did. Not by day anymore, no. But at night the villagers would creep up the hill, avoiding notice, coming for my cures, my restoratives, and my preventatives. And they paid. By God, they paid. They did not have money. Nobody had actual coin to spare, except the bloody Ramsgills. But they gave me what I asked or left empty-handed, no matter how they pleaded. Grain, hay, meat, cheese, even whiskey bay. Only what I needed, only what I wanted. The same women who called me whore, harlot, slut when my back were turned. But I knew, oh aye, I knew. So when they came to me, they paid dearly. I even had Anna Ramsgill appear, can they imagine? She did not go home with a remedy to cure Thomas's inattention. Oh no, she got something else entirely. But she cannot tell anyone. Not without admitting she cannot attract her husband anymore. And she only 32. She runs away from me now when she sees me in the village. Ha! A Ramsgill running from me in shame. That were more like it. I laughed out loud at the memory. The wassailers emerged back onto the lane. They marched straight past my house. Not a single one even paused. I watched them reach Mary Farmer's house further up the hill and gather around her door. The sound of their singing and cheers drifted down to me, and I grabbed Pa's old sheepskin coat and walked away into the blessed silence of the moor. It were not proper silent, of course, but I could enjoy the whistling of the wind and the mournful cries of owl and curlew. This were where I belonged, on the moor with bird and rodent, not with the rats of that village. Here the air were pure. There were no whispers of scorn or delight in another's fall, no sneering laughter or vicious insult. Here everything were as it should be: heather, bracken, sheep, grouse, and of course the ever-present owl. Sometimes audible by its hoot, often surprising as it glided past on silent wings. Then a thump and a squeal of its prey, and it were gone. Aye, I could learn a lot from the owls. I headed south towards the fairy spring near the rocking stone. The wind were getting up and I were frozen, but did not care. I thought I would be cold for the rest of my life. I pulled the coat tighter around myself, bent my head to the wind and trudged on. At least I could not hear the wassailers any longer. I reached the spring and knelt. Mam had died not far from here, and I felt close to her now. I did not like going to the graveyard anymore. The village were too close. Any road, her spirit were out here on the moors. In this spring were where I felt close to her. She used to come here regularly, dragging me along with her, even as a toddler. She would sit for hours with me on her knee, telling me stories of the fairy folk, the giants, all the beings who were here long before us and who we ignored at our peril. I used to love the sunlight dancing in the little splashes of water as it fell a few inches off a stone. And she told me those glints of light were the fairies. That if I ever needed help or a friend, I should come here and make my wishes known. They would always help me, no matter what. I hoped she were right. I shivered again as the December wind cut through my thick woolens. I looked up in alarm at a familiar but dreaded sound. The rocking stone were moving. The grinding resonated in my heart, and suddenly I could not bear to be out here any longer. I turned for home and ran as best I could through the heather. Okay.
Oh, it gives you the chills. Just listening to you there, Karen. Just gives you the chills.
It's such a haunting landscape and a chilling landscape in some respects as well. I think that's what really moved me, and it's also an awful big part of the inspiration for writing those books.
It really does take the image of the moors. Like all your books I have to read in the afternoon. Oh, it's still like
you were Sandy. Oh, thank you, Janet.
Goosebumps.
It really does give
So,
goosebumps.
as you were saying at the start of that one, there, Karen, the people would sneak up at night time, under cover of night, to get, whatever herbs, whatever they needed. But during the day, behind their back.
She was shamed because at that time, even though they knew she'd been taken complete advantage of by a married man who was much older than her, a much higher station, and she was obviously very vulnerable, grieving on her own.
Yeah.
But she was the female, so they turned on her.
Uh-huh.
Because he governed their livelihoods. They couldn't turn on him because they needed him to sell their wool. So she had no choice. She was very naive, didn't understand. Yeah. And she was left really with only one true friend left in the village, which was Mary Farmer, who was mentioned in that reading, who lived just up the hill. And she tried to look after her. But so as you can tell from that, this is really where Janet starts to turn from naive young girl, and she starts to become bitter and twisted, and the emotions turn dark, and her intentions start to turn dark as well. And
I mean, you can really connect with Janet in that story.
Yes.
You really do connect with her, and you really feel. I mean, she was twisted to the villagers, but
Yeah.
to the people reading their story, they just connect with her like a grieving woman that's been caught up and manipulated,
Yeah.
and it's such a great story, and oh god, it does. It makes you feel so sorry, and she's just one in a long line of people that ended up going through that same situation.
Yes,
You
yes,
know?
absolutely. And of course, she was very isolated. That we've all had a taste of isolation during the lockdowns of the past year.
Yeah.
This was before television, before telephones, cars, bicycles. She wouldn't have had a horse or even an ox to travel.
Yeah.
So small village, very insular, surrounded by the majesty of the moors, but also the vast expanse of the moors.
Yeah.
So the only way to leave would be on foot and nowhere to go, because her whole life was in that village. And then if the villagers themselves then turn against her, what does she do? It would turn anybody to
See, I mean, even though
that way.
She did have me
even though sorry, Shelley, even though the moors are massive and open, really well like a kind of prison to her sometimes. You know, they were a sense that they were a sanctuary, but also a prison in a way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And without giving too much about the story, that is, I mean, the parts of that story you've just it's so real how isolated she was.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I wrote it at a time that I was very isolated, just through ill health, and was housebound and feeling sorry for myself. And then I thought, well, hang on, you know, I can ring my family and my friends. I can watch the television. I can get a taxi to the door. This isn't true isolation. What would it be like without any of those things?
That's
I think that's where Janet came from, and that's where all that frustration and isolation came from as well. Oh, wow. Thank you, Mo. Thank you.
And that is exactly how you feel when you're reading Karen's books. You feel like you're right there at the time, whether it's in the past or in the present. You just feel so connected with the characters that you feel as though you're there with them.
Oh, that's wonderful. And I really do live with my characters, because I am still quite isolated and on my own. So, and my characters, they are here. They're here with me, and they do feel very real to me. And I'm sure Janet is real. And did I mention the girl that there was a figure in the window in the cover? I don't know if you can see that. The figure in the window.
You can see it now, Karen.
My wonderful cover designer, Cecilia Morgan. I didn't tell her about that. She came up with that on her own.
And that in itself just spooky, isn't it?
It is. But I suppose in acting, I suppose you call it method acting, and you put yourself in there completely. And I do, it's like putting the characters on like a coat or a cloak. And I'm writing. I am then when I'm writing, and I quite often write in the first person. So it's channeling, really. It's mediums channel writers channel characters, and sometimes.
And it's what it says at the beginning. You're almost doing that now while you're doing your readings. You're actually taking on the characters, and that's why it's just gripping.
Yeah, it's the only way I know how to do it, because they are.
Yeah,
that's how I've done it. And as I say, I'm sure that there is a lot of correlation and maybe quite a bit of crossover. And yes, Sandy's right. There are a few visitors around here at times.
Do you think maybe they help inspire you in some way as well? Your visitors?
Yes, they must. I mean, I've always had imaginary friends, as they were insisted that's what they were, but they were very real to me from a young age. But nobody in the family really understood. Although I found out later that both my grandmother and my aunt and one of my cousins felt the same. And actually, when I found my aunt actually did the tarot, which I did myself, that was wonderful. But yeah, it has really grown from that. It's my way of letting the characters in. I've had Spirit try to walk in, and that scares the hell out of me. I won't have it because I can't lose control like that. But the characters, I can do it. That way I can embrace them, let them embrace me, and that's how I can tell their story.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely brilliant, absolutely fascinating. The whole thing, all 3 stories. But I think we'll wind up there if that's all right, ladies.
Yes.
Karen, thank you very much indeed for 3 enthralling stories, well, parts of your books. Shelley, thanks for coming on, though. So, if anybody's won any of Karen's book, I think my voice is going to go, so I'll do this quick. If anybody's won any of Karen's books, we'll put all the links, details up on our Facebook page. As I say, they will be on our shop as well. Our shop should be up and running within the next 4 or 5 days. They'll be on our website. Karen, we've got you back in quite a bit next week. We've got you Tuesday.
That's proper.
Why did I miss that? I'm going to
Karen, you're giving me a break. That's it. I have to take a step back.
Karen's back on Tuesday for 1 o'clock Tuesday afternoon for the story of the marriage Celeste. Then she's back on Wednesday at 10:45 for the next part of Who Were They, the background to Pendle work on Pendle. And then Thursday at 9 p.m. Thursday at 9 p.m. we're doing Forgotten Pendle. There's a second big part of it. I'll be back tomorrow night with Joe from the English team who's doing the village of Eam. Did I say that right? Eam.
I think so. That's how I would say it as well. I'm better at spelling than I am at pronunciation, I have to admit.
Thanks very much, John.
Thank you.
So see, this is going to be a regular thing with Karen's book corner. This will be. We're very lucky to have her on board. So until tomorrow night or next Tuesday, whenever you want to join us, thanks for coming in, folks. Again, thank you, Karen, and we'll see you soon. So take care, enjoy the rest of your night, whatever it is.
Bye.
Thank you. Thanks everyone for. Bye.